My unemployed husband stole $50K from my credit card to take his mistress to Paris. But what he didn't know is that I work in cybersecurity. And the card he stole was an FBI trap. I'm 34 years old. I work in cybersecurity. And what I'm about to tell you still seems surreal, even though it's been several months. Basically, my husband, Tyler, stole my credit card information to go on a luxury trip to Europe with another woman. But what he didn't know, what makes this whole story so absolutely perfect, is that the card he stole was part of a fraud detection training program. Yeah, he literally stole a trap card. But let me start from the beginning, because this story has too many good details to skip. I met Tyler like 6 years ago at a mutual friend's party. He was super charming, one of those guys who knows exactly what to say and how to make you feel like you're the only person in the room. He was working in sales at the time, or at least that's what he told me, and he seemed to have ambitions and plans for the future. We got married after 2 years of dating, and for the first year everything was fine, I guess. But then I started noticing weird things. Tyler lost his job, which is fine. It happens. But then he didn't seem very interested in finding another one. He always had excuses, that the market was tough, that he was waiting for the perfect opportunity, that he needed time to rethink his career. So basically, he went from working in sales to doing nothing, while I paid all the bills. I work in cybersecurity for a big company, and I make good money. Don't get me wrong. But it started to bother me that Tyler was at home all day playing video games or watching Netflix while I was killing myself working. When I'd ask him about it, he'd get defensive and tell me he was stressed, that I didn't understand the pressure he felt, blah blah blah, classic. But anyway, I kept going because, I don't know. I guess part of me thought things would eventually get better. Spoiler alert, they didn't get better. The thing is, at my job, part of my responsibility is training new team members on how to detect fraud and suspicious activities on accounts for this. The company has these fake credit cards connected to dummy accounts that we use for fraud simulations. They're real accounts in the sense that they're connected to the banking system, but they're monitored 24/7, and any suspicious activity triggers automatic alerts that go straight to the FBI because, it's federal fraud. I had access to several of these accounts because I used them for training sessions, and all the information was saved on my work laptop, which, stupidly, I sometimes brought home. So one night, it was like 2 a.m, I woke up because I was thirsty and went down to the kitchen for water. Tyler wasn't in bed, which wasn't weird because the guy had a completely messed up sleep schedule. When I passed through the living room, I saw him sitting on the couch with my laptop open. I asked him what he was doing and he jumped, like he closed the laptop super fast and told me he couldn't sleep and was watching YouTube videos. It seemed weird to me because he has his own computer, but I was half asleep and didn't think much of it. Like 2 weeks later, I was checking my banking app at work during lunch, just checking that everything was okay, and I almost fell off my chair. There were like $50,000 in charges on one of my accounts. $50,000. My first thought was that someone had hacked my account, which is ironic considering what I do for a living. But when I started looking at the charges more closely, I saw they were all from places in Europe. Luxury hotels in Paris, expensive restaurants, designer clothing stores, like literally everything you could imagine on a dream trip. And then I realized these charges were on one of the dummy accounts from the fraud training program. I sat there trying to process what I was seeing. Who the hell would have access to this information? The answer came like a bucket of cold water. Tyler. That night, 2 weeks ago when I saw him with my laptop, that son of a bitch had stolen the card information from my computer. But here's the best part. What makes this story so perfect it seems made up. These accounts are specifically designed to catch people who commit fraud. Every transaction triggers alerts, every charge is monitored, every movement is recorded. Tyler basically walked into a mousetrap thinking it was a pantry full of cheese. The first thing I did was call my friend Chloe, who's a lawyer. I told her everything and she was silent for like 10 seconds, and then she started laughing. She told me, "Jessica, your husband is literally the stupidest criminal I've ever heard of, and I've worked with a lot of stupid criminals." She explained that what Tyler had done was federal credit card fraud, which is a felony, and that he could face up to 20 years in prison if convicted. 20 years. For wanting to go on a luxury vacation. While I was talking to Chloe, I got a call from an unknown number. It was a federal agent named Keller, who was investigating the fraudulent activity on the account. He asked me a bunch of questions about who might have access to my laptop, if I'd noticed anything suspicious recently, that kind of thing. I told him about Tyler, about that night 2 weeks ago, everything. Agent Keller told me they needed to meet with me in person to talk more about the case and asked if Tyler was home at that moment. I told him no, that supposedly he was on a business trip, which now obviously was a lie. The agent told me that Tyler had been in Paris for the last 2 weeks, living like a king with stolen money. When Tyler came home like 3 days later, he arrived with expensive suitcases and gifts, acting like nothing had happened. He gave me an expensive French perfume and told me he bought it thinking of me during his business trip. Business trip. I sat on the couch and asked him how his trip had been. He started telling me this elaborate story about meetings with potential clients and investment opportunities, and I just nodded while he kept digging his own grave. I asked him if he'd spent a lot of money, and he told me, well, I had to stay in decent hotels to make a good impression. You know how it is. At that moment, I decided to put my phone on record. I just left it on the table like nothing, screen down, and started asking him more specific questions. I asked him exactly where he'd stayed, what he'd eaten, if he'd met anyone interesting. And Tyler, this idiot, started bragging. He told me about the 5-star hotel with a view of the Eiffel Tower, about dinners at Michelin-starred restaurants, about €500 bottles of wine. I asked him how he'd paid for all that if he didn't have a job, and he went quiet for a second, but then told me he'd used his savings, that he'd been saving money in case an opportunity like this came up. I said, Tyler, you don't have savings. I pay all our bills. Where did that money come from? And that's when his face changed. He tried to backtrack, say that I was accusing him of something, that he couldn't believe I didn't trust him after everything we'd been through together. But I kept pressing. I told him, I found the charges. I know you used one of my credit cards. I just want to know why. And then he exploded. He yelled at me that I never supported him, that I always made him feel less, that he deserved to have nice things too, that if I really loved him, I wouldn't care that he borrowed a little money. Borrowed. $50,000. Borrowed. I asked him if he'd gone alone, and he got even more defensive. He told me that wasn't relevant, that the important thing was that he needed that break, that I didn't understand the pressure he felt. But I insisted, and he finally admitted he'd gone with someone, a woman he'd met online a few months ago. Her name was Nicole, and apparently they'd been seeing each other behind my back for half a year. Half a year. While I was working to support our home, he was having an affair and planning a luxury trip with my stolen money. Just when Tyler was in the middle of another one of his pathetic excuses, the doorbell rang. I went to open it, and there were 2 police officers and Agent Keller. Tyler went pale, like all the blood drained from his face. Agent Keller introduced himself and told Tyler they needed him to come with them to answer some questions about fraudulent activity on a credit card. Tyler looked at me like I was going to save him, like somehow I was going to say it was all a misunderstanding. But I just stood there, arms crossed, watching them take him away. They took him to the station for questioning, and, according to what Agent Keller told me later, Tyler tried to blame me. He said I'd given him permission to use the card, that I knew about the trip, that we were having marital problems, and that I was trying to get revenge on him. But they had the security video recordings from the hotel in Paris. They had his text messages with Nicole planning the trip, and I had the recording of him confessing he'd taken the money without permission. He had no way out. The legal process was long and exhausting. Tyler hired a lawyer who basically told him he was completely screwed and that his best option was to accept a plea deal. In the end, he agreed to plead guilty in exchange for a reduced sentence. He had to pay full restitution of the $50,000, plus interest and penalties, which is funny because he has no money. So basically, he's going to be paying this debt for the rest of his life. They also gave him community service and probation. The woman he went with, Nicole, left him immediately after he was arrested. I guess he wasn't so charming when he didn't have stolen money to spend on her. The divorce papers were finalized like 2 months ago. It was surprisingly simple because Tyler had nothing to claim. No assets, no income, nothing. Chloe helped me with everything, and we made sure it was very clear in the documents that he was responsible for all his legal debts and that I had no obligation to help him. She asked me if I wanted to request spousal support or something, but honestly, I just wanted it to be over. I just wanted to close this chapter of my life and move forward. Now, I live alone in a smaller but nicer apartment, and honestly, My life is so much better without Tyler. I don't have to worry about paying someone else's bills. I don't have to deal with his excuses and lack of ambition, and I definitely don't have to worry about him stealing my identity to finance his fantasies. Lauren, my best friend, tells me all the time that I was so lucky that Tyler was stupid enough to steal exactly the wrong card. And she's right. If he'd used one of my real cards, it probably would have taken me longer to notice and he could have done even more damage. Sometimes I think about that night when I saw him with my laptop and I wonder what would have happened if I'd investigated more at that moment. Would I have been able to stop him before he spent all that money? Would I have been able to save our marriage somehow? But then I realized there's nothing to save. Tyler showed who he really was. Someone willing to steal and lie and cheat without any remorse. And I deserve so much more than that. The irony of all this, what makes me still laugh sometimes, when I think about it, is that I work in cybersecurity. It's literally my job to detect and prevent exactly this type of fraud, and my own husband tried to do it to me. But I guess in the end, my experience and knowledge were exactly what caught him. The company where I work was super understanding about everything. My boss even joked that we should use this story as a case study in training sessions. Show what happens when you try to defraud a monitored account. They gave me a few weeks off to deal with all the legal and emotional process. And when I returned to work, my coworkers were incredibly supportive. Nobody judged me or made me feel bad about what had happened. If anything, I think everyone was impressed with how I handled the situation. Agent Keller contacted me a few weeks ago to tell me the case was officially closed and that Tyler had started paying restitution, though it's going to take him years to pay it all. He asked me how I was doing and I told him the truth. That I'm fine. Better than fine, actually. He told me that in his 20 years as a federal agent, he'd never seen a case so clear and with so much evidence against the accused, and that Tyler would probably go down in history as one of the most incompetent criminals he'd investigated. I couldn't help but laugh. Yesterday I was organizing my things and found the perfume Tyler brought me from Paris. That expensive perfume he gave me when he returned from his trip. It was still in the box. I'd never opened it. For a second, I considered throwing it away. But then I thought, you know what? I'm keeping it. Not because it means something or because I want to remember Tyler, but because it's a nice perfume that I technically paid for with my honest work, and I deserve it. So now I wear that expensive perfume from Paris. I wear it when I go to work or when I go out with Lauren, and every time I smell it, it reminds me that I survived this madness and came out stronger on the other side.